Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are connecting from. Happy Monday, everybody, unless you are on the other side of the world. So happy almost midnight for you. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here as part of our Hacking HR uh, guest and interview series. We bring some phenomenal authors, thought leaders to join us in these conversations. And I am particularly excited today. I am always excited about all the guests that we bring to the show, but today I'm having a little bit of a fanboy moment because if you are, like me, an entrepreneur who started your entrepreneurship journey in the past 15 to 20 years, I bet everything in my pocket right now that you read a lean startup and you've been part of the lean startup movement that Eric created, and it just meant so much for me when I read it for the first time. I have read it a couple of times. I should pick it up again, by the way. Um, so many concepts and ideas that I have tried to apply to everything that I do in my entrepreneurial life. So it is incredible to be able to interview Eric today to talk about his new book, and we are going to save just that moment for when he's on a stage with us. But in the meantime, to all of you connected via Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, and I see hundreds of people connected across all our social media channels. Please let us know where you're connecting from. I know sometimes the chat feature here is a little bit clunky, but I'm hoping that I can read you and I can read where you're connecting from. So please post in the chat where you're connecting from. Would love to know. And if you have any questions throughout the session today, throughout this interview today, just please let me know. Just post it in the chat and I will try to pick it up and ask Eric about that. My name is Enrique Rubio. I am the founder of Hacking HR, and we are a global learning community for HR leaders. And again, we always bring great thought leaders and authors who are sharing their ideas and their experiences and their research with us. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Eric to the screen together with me. Hello, Eric. Good morning, man. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Totally fine. Totally fine. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah. When did you write the Lean Startup, by the way? Has it been like 20 years already?
15. It came out 15 years ago, 2011, and I worked on it for the several years before that. So yeah, we're coming up on 20 years. It's kind of ridiculous.
20 years. I just can't believe it. I was talking to my wife recently, and we just realized that people who were born in the year 2000 are already 26 years old. So that makes me feel a little old. Uh, so excited to have you here. And I want to begin by asking you about the journey, your journey. You know, you started as an entrepreneur, you've worked in technology, you've developed technology companies yourself, you wrote the book and created the movement, the Lean Startup movement, and you've written several books in between, and now you're coming up with Incorruptible. So tell me about the journey. How do you go from an individual entrepreneur to now writing a book about how companies go, why companies go bad and how they can stay great?
Well, gosh, thank you. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Well, gosh, the journey, it's been it's been a long, strange trip, as they say. I started out as a tech entrepreneur. I was building tech startups. That was my career. And I thought I would be doing that forever. And really, it was only I was in between startups during the Great Recession. I built a company and was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I wanted to be, I'd always been the CTO. I've been the person who wrote the software in my first couple startups. So I was like, okay, this time I think it might be appropriate for me to try my hand at being a startup CEO. And I wanted to know, what does the startup CEO actually do? Simple questions like, how do you know when to launch your product? And how do you know when it's time to abandon the strategy and try something new? Things like, if you have customers, which customers do you listen to and which ones do you ignore? And I would go around asking people, hey, I had these questions before I became CEO, and they would tell me these stories that made no sense to me. They'd be like, well, Steve Jobs did it this way. You're like, okay, I like Steve. He's a cool guy, but I'm no Steve Jobs. That was then, this is now. That was his industry. What about mine? How do I know that what he did will work for me? And then the next person would be like, yeah, but Bill Gates did it the exact opposite way. And you'd be like, okay, I also like Bill Gates, but again, what am I supposed to do? And it was like, I was getting all this contradictory stories, all this lore, all these kind of like, it was almost like an apprenticeship system in Silicon Valley. Like if you get to know the key people, they'll give you the key inside info. Um, and I didn't think that was right. That seemed wrong to me, that there ought to be some like better way to figure out what to do, to have practices that we could evaluate and talk about and reason about, not to mention measure. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey. And I was, I had the privilege of being able to build on the mentorship of lots of amazing people. I was part of, Steve Blank's customer development when it was just at the beginning, and agile software and extreme programming and software craftsmanship. Like there were all these things bubbling around, and I thought, okay, I think we're starting to see the outlines, like the shape of a new way of building startups. And what was interesting to me was that I had really learned all these best practices. That's what they call them, like these received wisdom, these things that you're supposed to do. And they didn't seem right to me. Like my intuition was like, I don't understand why these are the best practices. But like for so many years in my career, I was like, well, these very smart people are saying that, so they must know something that I don't. And when I finally had the courage to start breaking the best practices and trying to think for myself and try new things, that unlocked a lot for me in my career. And then I started sharing that with other people. And the thing I didn't realize at the time is when you start sharing stuff with other people, if it breaks the best practices, it makes them mad.
Yeah.
So that was the origin of all this, like my personal struggles getting it to work, and making a lot of other people mad.
Oh man, remember, you're talking to HR people here, and for a very long time, and I love HR, by the way, but I come with a similar background of yours. I am a technologist, and I love HR, but for a very long time, we've gotten all these best practices by either consulting companies who have never put them into practice themselves, or practices that have been around for so long that they really don't make sense anymore. So you start as an entrepreneur, as a technologist, you become an entrepreneur, you write a book about how startups should work. And then, 15 years later, now you are about to launch your book about why good companies go bad and how great companies stay great. And I know we're going to be digging deeper into the concepts of the book, but I want to ask you, you know, that's quite a leap forward,
Oh, yeah.
between it's like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a technologist, I'm writing the ins and outs of how a startup should work, but there's got to be something that happened that you observed in the past 15 years that told you, I need to write something about this, because there are some companies that are staying true to their values and some other companies that are going too far off their original journey. So what was the driver here?
Yeah. Well, I've been very busy the last 15 years. And so, and it's funny, Dan Heath, the great business author, Dan Heath, who wrote, Made to Stick and Switch and a bunch of other great business bestsellers. He just wrote an incredible review of the new book. You can find it on LinkedIn or if you're on his email list. And one of the things that I admire the most about what he said is he was saying how much he appreciated that I could have basically spent my whole life, he called that, I think, eating out on Lean Startup. And just being the Lean Startup guy and doing consulting and doing Lean Startup for X and Lean Startup for Y and all this other stuff. But I've never really been wired that way. I did get to do a lot of Lean Startup for X and Y. Don't get me wrong. I did get to start the Lean Startup company, and we do support a lot of companies. And I've done a lot of HR projects, interestingly, because a lot of big companies embrace Lean Startup, and governments and NGOs, like bureaucratic institutions that wanted to bring innovation in. Of course, many of the startups that I met them when they were two guys in a garage, eventually got big and went public, and they started to have the kind of problems that, your listeners would be very familiar with. So I did get to do a lot of management consulting and a lot of helping people build superior management systems. But I also felt like that whole time that we were up against some force that I couldn't quite name, that was ruining all our good work. And if you talk to other business authors, they often privately, and we're not supposed to say this out loud in public, but it seems like when business, believe me, when business authors get together over drinks, we talk about how frustrating it is that like you make companies better and then they get ruined anyway. It's like, it doesn't stick. We can't make it stick. The new people coming up make the same old mistakes that we were preaching about years ago. Like, think about how many people in AI had to learn the Lean Startup lessons the hard way. So why? What's going on? And, I also, in addition to my work as a consultant, I'm also been an entrepreneur this whole time I built an AI research lab, I built a law firm, built all kinds of companies. But for our purposes, an important one, I built the long-term stock exchange, or LTSE, which is like the new national securities exchange, the first new one really with a new listings model since the creation of NASDAQ 50 years ago, trying to really build long-term thinking into the capital markets. So as a result of all this work, I really got deeply educated about corporate governance, about financial systems, about how it works behind the curtain. And so, for example, when several of the big companies that I did significant transformation work, when they got attacked by activists, I got a front row seat. I got to see how the board reacted, how managers reacted. I got to see this force, I call it financial gravity, how it warps organizations. And that's really the beginning of the new book that I've spent years battling against this invisible force. It was like, no matter how good a management system you have, no matter how good your HR policies are, no matter how good you are at recruiting, we still get pulled down into mediocrity. The same people we were so excited to hire, as soon as they're here, they lose that spark of interest. And then on top of all that, watch a lot of companies lose their soul. There's really no other word for it. The founder gets removed, or all the new people are more loyal to the best practices than they are to the company. We see pressure from investors, takeovers from investors, all kinds of stuff. And so I just felt like this doesn't make sense. Like there's something deeply wrong about the state of our business, of business itself right now. And I came to feel like we were so focused as leaders on what we've been trained, the surface characteristics of organizations, the org chart, culture, business model, strategy, even the vision, the things we can see and control. And we are ignoring the underlying forces, like the physics that act on organizations, that cause them to behave the way that they do. And so I wanted to investigate that force. And I started in my work with startups, started to say, wait a minute, I think there's something we can do about it. I think if you structure the organization differently, if we teach different leadership principles, if we're willing once again to break the best practices, we can actually build organizations that stay true to their purpose over time.
No, I love that. And this may have been just a sheer coincidence of time or not, but is there a reason, parenthesis AI, close parenthesis, that you're releasing the book right now, or totally unrelated to all things that are happening in this new age of AI?
Well, it is related, but not in that way, in the obvious way that you would think. So AI raises really important new governance problems that I happen to be lucky enough that many of the major AI companies pulled me in to discuss those things. So I find like I know the people who have shaped this era, and I tell the story in the book of the bit part that I played in setting up the governance of Anthropic, for example. So that was my entree into AI, was really through the governance lens. But I think also because AI has a tendency to exacerbate existing problems, like whatever problems you have in an organization, AI makes it worse. Whatever problems we have as a society, like AI accelerates for good and for ill. Like it's a magnifier, a force multiplier inside organizations. And so because of that, I think the governance challenges that we've been having as a society with corporations, with organizations writ large, AI makes those much more salient. So I'll give you an example. For many years, I was like an eccentric collector. Some people collect butterfly wings, other people collect marbles or baseball cards. I collected alternative governance systems. Companies, like the details of companies that are structured differently than today's best practices, and all the data that supports why that is actually superior. And for a long time, it was just my eccentric hobby. I would talk to people about it, leaders, founders, doesn't matter. People would be like, "Oh, that's nice, Eric," pat me on the head, and they move on. But over time, I think, especially because of AI, people are starting to feel like we don't want a repeat of what happened with social media, with AI. We don't really like how the world has gone these last few decades. Companies that were so idealistic, that we believed in so much, they suck now. It's like they're just lame. They're bureaucratic. They're slow. A lot of them are downright evil. And if you talk to the people who were there, it's like almost inexplicable to them. They're like, "But I liked leadership the whole time. I thought we were doing the right thing." One person said to me in my research, it wasn't just that I was drinking the Kool-Aid. This is an HR leader. She said, "I was serving the Kool-Aid."
Wow.
And then one day, boom, it all came crashing down. So there's a broad spectrum disillusionment in where we are with business now. And it's extremely strong if you look at the generational splits. So I think part of the reason I wanted to write this book was to diagnose what's gone wrong, but not just to write another book about, oh, how everything's terrible, we're all going to die. Instead, to really give a firm and specific path out of the darkness, a blueprint for how leaders can impact their organizations, whatever size, stage, level they're at, that can make them more strong, more resilient, more able to act with integrity.
Oh, I love that. And now I want to go a little bit deeper into the book. And by the way, I have to thank your team. I don't know if I can show this, but I'm gonna do it. Sorry,
Yeah,
Eric.
it's okay. It's
This
okay.
is this the copy that I got. It's like the pre-ready copy. And I want to ask you, what makes an organization great and what makes an organization bad, which are the core fundamentals of the spectrum of your book. But I first want to read I read the book to prepare for this, but I want to read the first, just literally the cover of the book that I received.
Yeah.
And it says, the organizations that truly serve human flourishing don't need sacrifice. They win by being better. I love that. And that already sets me up in the right direction of what makes a company great and what makes a company bad. But can you just elaborate a little bit more about greatness and badness in a company?
Yeah, this is something that in our very cynical age, a lot of your listeners will have a hard time believing, but we have the receipts. Okay. We have the data that shows this. Mission driven companies, purpose driven companies, companies you can trust outperform. We have hundreds of different studies that show this in many, many, many different dimensions. So this is not just a topic of ethics or morality. Important those things are. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
I think acting ethical is something you should do for its own sake, not just because it comes with all kinds of material rewards. But for organizations, there are these material rewards to be accessed. Can I answer your question about greatness and badness through a story? Maybe just to make it more concrete
absolutely.
for your listeners. Okay. Let me tell you the legend of Saul Price. Okay. For some of your listeners, Saul Price is a figure, a mythological figure that they know really well, but a lot of people, especially outside of retail, don't really know him. Saul was the father of modern retail, the unquestioned father of modern retail. If you want to get a sense of how influential he was, when Sam Walton was thinking about starting a retailer and he was trying to think about what he should call his new company, he called it Walmart as an intentional tribute to Saul Price's company, which was called FedMart, the original big box
Wow.
retail store. So Saul Price is a really interesting figure in business history because he kind of illustrates this point so well. He was a man who had a philosophy of business, an ethos, and he showed the way how to build a great company. So the reason I think he was so good at this is he was trained before he became an entrepreneur as a lawyer. He was concerned with HR and compliance and stuff like that, which people think of as so boring and so like anti-entrepreneurial, but that's not how Saul saw it. He saw it like this. He said, well, as a lawyer, I was trained above all to be of service. I have what's called a fiduciary duty to my client. That means I put the client's interests before my own. So when he became a retailer, he asked this deceptively simple question: who's my client? He's like, if I'm a discount retailer, then I have a fiduciary duty to the customer. The customer is my client. So he built the whole company not to maximize shareholder returns, but to be a fiduciary to the client, to the customer. And he had a simple fiduciary hierarchy: customers first, employees second, shareholders last. You see this pattern in many of the greatest companies in history. The great Peter Drucker actually thought it should be different. He said it should be employees first, customers second, shareholders last. If you know the famous Johnson & Johnson Our Credo, that's doctors, patients, and nurses first, employees second, communities third, and shareholders last. You notice in the pattern? Exactly the opposite of what we teach today is our best practice. Anyway, that was the mantra of FedMart. Let me give you a sense of how seriously he took this. When competitors would try the lost leader strategy on FedMart to try to steal their customers and drive down their foot traffic by offering products below their own cost and advertising it, Saul would put up signs inside his own store saying, don't buy this product from me. You can get it cheaper down the street. And he showed the address of the store that was doing it. He's like, I'm your fiduciary. So if I can get you a cheaper price, I don't care if it's from me or not. He paid above market wages. He had so many enlightened HR policies. It's crazy. He was a really early opponent of segregation. He refused to segregate his stores even when he operated in the South. All kinds of stuff that just was extra difficulty for no immediate reward. But as a result, people trusted FedMart.
Mm.
Right? Once you see that he's willing to tell you if there's a lower price, then you know he's got the lowest price.
Yeah.
He practiced what he called capped margins. He wouldn't mark up an item more than 14%, even if he could get away with it. He preached the intelligent loss of sales because he only carried limited SKUs, only high quality products. He wouldn't sell something if he didn't believe it was any good. Anyway, all these practices together made FedMart into a great company. And so it grew. It was a very fast growing private company. He took the company public at a successful IPO. Everything was going great. Except as a public company, he felt this gravitational pressure that we've been talking about, this pull to deviate from what had made FedMart great and to adopt the best practices of the time. What are the best practices? Saul believed in low prices and high wages, but the best practice is high prices and low wages. He was under constant pressure to squeeze his, what we would now call his stakeholders, for more money for investors. But he refused. He was a very stubborn guy, would not do it. So he had a very miserable time as a public company, so much so that he decided to take the company private. He brought in new investors to buy out all the public investors, build a new board, and start it over. But the new board, it didn't solve any of his problems because the new board was also captured by this same financial gravity. This is the pattern we see with leaders all through history. They're naive about what they're up against. So they do things that don't really solve the problem. So as great as Saul was, he didn't solve the problem. He found himself with a hostile board. What did the new board want? You'll never guess. They wanted faster expansion, retail best practices. They wanted higher prices and lower wages. But Saul was as stubborn as they come, and he wouldn't do it. The result was one day in 1975, after Saul had been building FedMart for more than 20 years, he comes into work and he can't get into his office because they've changed the locks on the door. And Saul doesn't work there anymore. Now, they bungled this from an HR point of view, by the way. He sued them for wrongful termination. And in fact, he did eventually win his lawsuit. But that didn't really solve the problem because he was ousted from the company. He couldn't get his job back. So it's one of these like really defining moments in business history. What happened this day in 1975? Because it gives us a really natural A/B test. Well, let's see what happened to FedMart. FedMart, the board got what they wanted. With Saul gone, they were able to enact all the policies they wanted, faster growth. I think the board understood something that Saul never did. They understood that precisely because customers trusted FedMart, the board could get away with betraying them and they wouldn't notice at first. So in the short term, it seemed like it was working great. FedMart was having just seemed like it was poised for explosive growth. But in the long run, it was a failure. By 1982, within 7 years, the board had driven the company into bankruptcy. They destroyed in 7 years what it took Saul more than 20 to build. It's so much easier to destroy than to build, a pattern we'll see again and again in companies where their own success becomes a liability. But what did Saul do? That was branch A of our A/B test. What's in the B branch? Well, Saul took 2 weeks off and then he was back at work. He leased the office upstairs from FedMart and started a new company, which he called the Price Club. Now, today, Price Club is not well known because, although when I was growing up, it was a major retailer. My family shopped at Price Club all the time. But we don't know Price Club today because of what happened next. See, a lot of people quit FedMart in protest when Saul was fired because the employees were loyal to him too. And one of those people was a guy named Jim Sinegal. He had worked his way up from stock boy to executive at FedMart, and he left in protest with Saul. And a few years later, he actually branched out to start his own company with Saul's blessing. So he started a brand new company. And a few years after that, his company and Price Club merged to form a company that they called Price Costco, but we call it Costco. Okay. This is actually the legend of Saul Price is the deep cut history of Costco. Costco today is a $400 billion public company, and it still maintains the ethos of Saul Price, the capped margins, the fiduciary to the customer, the whole thing. Jim Sinegal was asked once, I think around the time of Saul's death, he said, a journalist asked him, seems like you learned a lot from Saul Price. He said, no, you're mistaken. I learned everything from Saul Price. Wow. So Costco is finally the realization of Saul's vision all these years later, 70 years later, is going strong. But the question now, to answer your question, what makes a company great versus why do some companies go bad? Now we can really answer it. Why did Costco endure? Costco's been going 40 years now. Why has Costco endured, whereas FedMart failed? Why is it that Costco, if you hear people talk about business, they always talk about Costco being the exception to every rule. And it really is like very different from almost any other company that of its competitors. Why? Well, first of all, there are two ingredients that you need to build a company and keep it great in the face of financial gravity. First, you need a corporate ethos like Saul had. You got to be a fiduciary to the customer. You got to be able to articulate your business philosophy. And from an HR policy, from an internal alignment policy, you have to get the whole company rowing in the same direction, everyone committed to that purpose in a fundamental way. But there's a second ingredient you need. See, when Jim Senegal set up Costco, he didn't want what happened to FedMart to happen to him. So Costco was built with what I call a governance fortress that protects it from outside pressure and inside temptation. Costco's board has a very different idea of what it's doing than people who are enthralled to today's best practices. So that change in structure allows Costco to act with integrity, meaning if Costco makes you a promise, you can believe that promise. But also, I mean it kind of like structural integrity, when it's like a bridge that refuses to collapse no matter how much gravity, how much load it's asked to bear. And that's really the formula for a great company, the ethos of Saul Price and the integrity of Costco.
Oh man, that is such a powerful story. And as before you said that it was Costco, I kept thinking about Costco as you were narrating, describing your example, and I kept thinking about the Arizona tea as well. I don't know if you analyze them. This is a company that has stayed very close to its values. There was an interview with the founder, because he hasn't raised the prices in forever, and he was asked, "Why don't you raise the prices? You can make more money." And he said something like, "But why do I want to make more money? I'm making enough already,
Right.
and I'm not going to make it more difficult for people to get tea, right?" But let me ask you actually a couple of questions, and I don't know if this would be a fair question to ask because it's like very, binary. But of all the companies that you know out there in the market, what percentage of companies do you think are the FedMart that evolved or changed, not evolved, transformed into something that it wasn't supposed to be, and how many are the Costco-like kind of companies? And a second part to that question is this: you said, there, there was a lock on the door when he tried to come in. He was fired, and my perception as a user of so many services and seeing so many companies operating in the FedMart kind of way, the second iteration, seems to me that a lot of companies have lost their direction, their compass, their map. So I'm
Totally.
wondering if you fear that you will find yourself locked out because you are, working against the current, it seems to me. So what are your insights on these two questions?
Sure. Yeah, it's very interesting. If you ask most people about a favorite company that's lost its way, like if you just ask people, do you know a company that's happened to? Everybody will be like, I can give you 20 examples.
Yeah.
We are living this every day. Like, favorite brand ruined by private equity, favorite brand destroyed after it goes public, gets acquired by a public company, just get totally ruined. I mean, Cory Doctorow wrote a whole book that he called Enshittification. It's just examples from the tech industry of products that have gotten so much worse when they're supposed to be getting better. The competitive logic of capitalism makes you think they would get better. So something's obviously gone wrong. But what's weird is the same people, if you say, why does this happen? They always give you the same answers. They say, well, it's greed, human nature, companies going public, money, power, status, age, size of the company. Like they treat it like it's inevitable. And the book is actually structured not like a traditional business book. It's a little different. It's more like a mystery, a double mystery. The first mystery is, why is this happening? Why is this so pervasive, right? Why do investors kill the golden goose? Like they're causing companies to lose their value creating engine. Why would investors do that? Capitalism, again, would argue that the way we think about capitalism as the selection process for value creation and competition would say this shouldn't happen. It should be rare, yet it's all around us. But the second mystery is, if it's inevitable, if it's a law of nature that this happens as companies age, why are there exceptions? See, Costco's not the only exception. In pretty much every industry, if you look carefully, you will find an outlier company. And people know them. These aren't obscure, minor, tiny little companies. You ever shopped at Patagonia? You ever eat a Hershey chocolate bar?
Yeah.
You ever You ever taken a Novo Nordisk medication, shopped at John Lewis Partnership, you watch Wallace and Gromit, like you shopped at REI, you have a Vanguard Mutual Fund. Like I could do this all day. There's all these exception companies. And the weird thing about the exception companies is if you study their structure, you will find that they universally violate every governance best practice of today. Like, it's unbelievable how opposite they are. Costco routinely gets the worst possible governance rating from governance rating agencies. And in fact, this is a wild stat. Since 2008, so we're coming up on 18 years of the stat now. It's a pretty big data set now. Since 2008, public companies that are rated to have bad governance have outperformed the companies rated to have good governance. So what are we doing? Like, it's so bizarre. What are we doing?
Yeah.
So yes, if you add up all the exceptions, I did a kind of a back of the envelope math, because it's kind of hard to tell because they're studied in different silos in academia. So you have kind of cooperatives are studied differently than employee-owned companies, differently than industrial foundations, differently than purpose trusts. Anyway, if you add up all those companies, it's something like between 3 and 5% of world GDP.
Wow.
So it's not a niche affair, but it is the extreme minority. It is like 1 in 20. Most companies, most founders, most leaders, frankly, who are indoctrinated in today's best practices are building companies to be slaughtered. They're being taught how to raise them for the fattening rather than for long-term health. So yeah, I think that unless we change, unless we who are the practitioners, the leaders in these organizations, if we don't insist on change, we're going to keep repeating and repeating and repeating this same insane pattern. In the book, I give case studies of it happening over the course of 200 years. I have case studies from 1800 and from 1950 and from 19. So you pick the decade, I've got a case study for you of companies that lost their way, lost that spark that made them special. And in most cases, the destruction follows immediately, like in FedMart, although sometimes they limp along like a zombie for many years. And of course, sometimes the worst outcome, the most sad outcome I know from the people who found these companies, the thing that makes you the saddest is when it does endure like a perpetual zombie.
Yeah.
So now it's actually become damaging or dangerous, but you don't control it anymore. It's like Frankenstein and his monster.
Do you think there's a compression timeline for this phenomena to be happening? I mean, you're talking about companies that were founded, 60, 70 years ago. But I looked like, and again, I'm not a researcher of this topic, right? So I'm seeing this through you, but I see some technology companies that were created literally in the past 20 years or less that I myself and many other people, we were fans of these companies. And somehow now we are like, the only reason why I use you is because there's nobody else. Otherwise, I would ditch you, immediately. So is there a compression timeline of how fast companies are now losing their way?
It has gotten a lot worse. In the book, I have a quote. I say, we've entered an age of temporary operators managing temporary organizations for temporary owners. Because the average age of companies is collapsing, the average holding period for stocks is collapsing, and the average executive tenure is collapsing. Like, who are these organizations being managed for? It's really quite sad. I quote, and I don't mean to pick on Google because Google's actually a great company in many ways, but the people who worked at Google for a long time, when they leave Google, they write these blog posts. If you read them back to back to back to back, they're kind of eerie. You're like, what happened to this company? Everyone's like so like they had such high hopes for what it could become, and they wind up so disappointed. Somebody wrote, decisions, I think he'd been there 13 years. Decisions went from being made in the interests of customers to being made in the interest of Google to being made in the interest of whoever was making the decision. As timelines are collapsing, as everyone's horizon is getting more and more short term, we can't help but do the lowest common denominator, do the cheapest, easiest, quickest way to make a dollar, instead of really making sure that the company prospers through the protection and advancement of its mission.
Yeah, wow. Let me ask you, I definitely want to talk about HR in all this context, but let me ask you a question. I'm gonna go back to the example of FedMart. I'm gonna quote something you said before. The team who remained true to the values of the company were naive about what they were fighting against. So so many companies call you, Eric, we want your help. and now they read this book and they're like, "Phew, Eric is talking about something completely different from what we're actually doing." So I don't know if we're going to call Eric again. So how do you feel? I mean, I don't know if this is going to happen, but how do you feel about fighting against the current? Are you naive about what you're fighting against? Are you clear about it, but you really want to set up a different direction here? So how do you feel about all of this?
Oh, I'm used to this. Okay. I thought that when I first started talking about this, 4 or 5 years ago, that would be the end of my career, that
Mhm.
nobody would want to talk to me anymore. But it's the opposite. I get more calls now than ever
Yeah.
before, because for founders that care about their integrity of their mission, I'm one of the few people you can talk to about it. I didn't put this in the book, but a very early formative experience for me working on these issues. A founder called me, and I want to preserve his anonymity because this is a very personal conversation. He called me,
Of course.
and he was telling me he wanted to build something in the humane tech space. So basically, like trying to take our existing technologies and make it more human, more advancing human flourishing instead of being exploitative. And it's a really cool company, and they're doing great today. But he called me. He asked, for my advice. That I heard you can help me think about mission and governance and stuff like that. No one will talk to me about it. And I laid out the argument from the book, and I explained the techniques and all this stuff. And he started crying.
Wow.
He was like, nobody will talk to me about it. Everyone's patting me on the head and saying, don't worry about that. Get product market fit. You can always figure it out later. But I don't want that. And he told me this haunting story. He was actually like very close to a bunch of very successful Silicon Valley people, our mutual friends of ours. And he tells me this story. It was so sad. It was talking about some billionaire, someone with more money than you can possibly imagine. And he had been at a party, and he was like, this guy, he's in his 40s or 50s now. He's like at the party with him, and he was just like, the guy's like hitting on 20-year-olds and basically dancing by himself because like his family has left him. He has all this money, and he just seems so miserable. And he's like, he really was opened up to me. He's like, is that going to be me someday if this company
Mm.
succeeds? And I was like, well, look what happened to his company. We know, we all like, look what happened. His own kids are embarrassed to be related to him
Yeah.
because it's sad what happened. Anyway, so that has been my experience a lot in the last few years, is that people, they have a sense that they're in danger.
Mhm.
They don't want to be naive. They don't want to get eaten alive by this system, and they have more power than they realize. So here's the thing. We think of this financial system as all powerful. Like there's, it's these, we beg investors for money. We beg boards. We beg, Wall Street, please, oh, please let us run our company. But it's the reverse. This system needs builders more than builders need this system. For example, the total number of public companies in America has fallen by more than half in the last 25 years.
Wow.
Average tenure of companies who are public is going down. And we're seeing basically like a cannibalization. The system is eating itself alive from the inside. The only reason it hasn't collapsed is that we provided a steady stream of fresh meat to replenish what it is destroying. If we stopped, if we said no more, or if we just conditioned our participation and said only if you're willing to support the principles we care about, the builders of the world could have any financial system they want. Collectively, they have absolutely all the power. We are in a world awash in capital, and there's far more capital that needs to be invested in new things than we have good opportunities for it. It is the opportunities which are scarce, not capital. So yeah, I actually have become more and more and more confident that builders are going to flock to this banner, because builders are the ones who have the power, and they are the ones who intuitively want to build companies of real integrity and real longevity.
Yeah. That is. I'm glad to hear that. Because sometimes you can get really depressed, when you see companies that you once trusted and believed in and admired, doing things that you are like, but I can't be okay with this. I want to ask you two last questions, and I know we're getting closer to wrapping up. One
Sure.
question is about HR. I'm going to leave that last, but I do want to ask you a question about AI. And I know you're a technologist, big fan of AI. Do you think that the fact that right now everybody, given the access to technology, is becoming a builder of something, that will make it, that will create a case for the companies who have lost their way to try to find it back because they can have now an AI native competitor getting into their space, staying true to their values, and saying, "Hey, not only am I faster than you, cheaper or not, but I am staying true to my values." Do you think this is going to put some competitive pressure on the companies that have lost their way? Given that now anybody can pretty much build a company overnight with AI.
Oh yeah, yeah. The class, we need to start making class distinctions, if you will. We have a governance class, but we don't talk about it as such. We need to understand that there's a builder class. Like there's
Mm.
people who share, and what makes you a builder is not, that you have a hammer. What makes you a builder is that you share what I call the builder's intuition, the idea that there are better and worse ways to make money, and the best way is to create new value in the world and capture some of it for yourself. And so many people, like if you're a leader and your work requires the ready participation of many hands. Okay, I don't care if you're an artist or a scientist or an engineer or a manager, it doesn't matter to me. If you share the builder's intuition, if you need to collaborate with other human beings to see it done, then you're a builder. You are part of this class. And what's funny is that we live in the era of what's called shareholder primacy, which is the idea that organizations are not vital living beings, designed to create value for customers. They're just financial instruments designed to make money for shareholders. For example, a Wall Street analyst a couple of years ago criticized Costco like this. They said, Costco is taking money that rightfully belongs to shareholders and instead investing it in improving the customer experience. It's like, how is that a criticism?
Oh
But
my gosh.
if you understand that under shareholder primacy, customers, employees, communities, these are resources to be mined, not partners to be served. Only the investors have the fiduciary commitment. So by that logic, every kind of exploitation is not only permissible, it is required.
Mm.
And yet most builders find this intolerable. In fact, I work with a lot of founders who've never read their corporate charter. When I have them read it and explain to them what it means, they're horrified. They go to their lawyer and like, man, how could you do this to me? And the lawyer's like, what? I gave you the best practice document. So we have to kind of take this into our own hands and say, we don't really believe in this anymore. We don't think this is right. We actually think there are better and worse ways to make money. We're not going to give our social sanction. We're not going to give our followership, our eyeballs, our admiration to people who behave in exploitative ways, no matter how rich they are. And when we have a choice of partners, we're going to choose the ones who are aligned with this philosophy rather than just who has the slickest marketing or gives us the highest valuation or whatever.
Yeah, wow, that is powerful, and this has been such an incredible conversation. And again, given that this is not the space in which I work with HR people. It's really encouraging to see people as influential as you talking about this. I'm hoping that we see more people that are at the level that you are, with the reputation that you have in this world, to continue talking about these important topics. So thank you, Eric, for that. And I want to ask you one question to wrap up, which should have probably been the first question, but I'm asking it last. And by the way, for everybody, we prepared like 20 questions that I haven't asked any of the questions that I prepared. I'm asking other questions that I think have been more important given the scope of our conversation right now. So that's been very, very fun, to make it more organic. But Eric, to wrap up our conversation, we have a few hundred people connected throughout our social media channels. They are HR leaders, HR practitioners. So all of this that you just described, can you make that practical, tangible, closer to the HR leaders tuning into this conversation right now?
Yeah. So yeah, we've been talking about structure, but remember that I said that the formula has two parts: ethos
Yes.
first, and then structure. And
Yeah.
the ethos, that really is the domain of HR. So in the book, like at least half the book is about the inner alignment practices that we have to do. In fact, I have a whole chapter where I advocate for what I call the alignment method, which is a new way of thinking about HR. And I'll give it to you in brief, but of course, you don't learn about this in a live stream in 5 minutes. You got to study the
Yeah.
details. So yeah, please check it out. The idea is very simple. I studied with a lot of CEOs of strong culture companies, and I noticed this pattern. They treat trustworthiness as an asset, like a financial asset that's very valuable. And so I have this idea I call the culture bank, which is every time the company makes a sacrifice, to do the right thing in defense of its values that comes at some kind of cost. I tell a story about HEB, the grocery store, where during an ice storm, the power goes out. The manager lets the customers walk out of the store with all their groceries in their cart because there's no way to pay. Customers were in tears with such gratitude. And yet, most companies wouldn't do that because they'd be like, well, what's the ROI?
Yeah.
Right? And you can't calculate the return, but you can calculate the cost. And so therefore you stack rank it ROI negative. So every time that a manager does something like that, instead of seeing it as ROI negative, we see it as a deposit, an investment in the company's trustworthiness. The culture bank's like the vault where we store these asset trustworthiness that we're stockpiling. And of course, anytime we do the reverse, we exploit customers because we can get away with it. That's a withdrawal from the bank. So when you have this structure in place, first of all, it helps you reason about what to do and not do, helps you enact rules that say, hey, we're going to only make deposits around here. We're not going to make withdrawals. But then the really powerful part of it is you can start to build the lore, the stories of employees doing this, which you can integrate into all of your communication practices. So today, company communications tend to be fragmented. Internal comms is separate from external comms, which is separate from investor relations, which is separate from employment brand and recruiting. But if those four places are telling four different stories about the company, you're so doomed.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is integrate those into one story in something I call the Leader's Guide, a compilation of the stories of the employees who have gone above and beyond doing the right thing. And when people hear about the need to build this repository of stories, they're like, God, it sounds like so much work. How am I going to find all these stories? Well, good news. HR departments already perform on an annual basis the most expensive story collecting effort in human history called performance reviews. But unfortunately, we use performance reviews only to set levels and do promotions and bonuses. That's like mining for gold and keeping only the dirt. We don't even write the stories down. Nobody ever reads any of these stories. It's a total waste. So instead, we do something I call the two-way review. We understand that a review process, it does have a one-way function, which is we have to evaluate individual employees in performance for all the reasons we do it today. Consistency, for leveling, for promotion, for incentive design, of course. But we do a two-way review. We realize that the stories we collect, the complete database of them, also renders a judgment on the company's coherence. If we have different departments that are feuding with each other, if we have one department that thinks our values are X, but a different department thinks our values are Y, this will surface that proactively instead of waiting for a crisis. And so who should do this? I don't even really like the phrase human resources.
Yeah.
I prefer the Department of Corporate Purpose. Who is responsible? Everything in modern corporations requires a DRI, right? It requires somebody who this is their responsibility. So who is responsible for making sure the organization stays true to its purpose? Whoever that is, not only has this awesome responsibility, can like level up their own career because now they're not talking the inner language of HR to other HR professionals, but they're speaking the governance language, the financial language that the whole organization can understand. They also buy themselves a seat at the governance table because at the end of the day, purpose is the province of the board. And so an enlightened board that follows, on the book, I call it the new governance, will have a much stronger relationship with whoever can speak this language, whoever can hold this responsibility. So I think this is a pathway for senior leaders of all functions, but especially of HR, to level up in their career and join the big kids table.
Oh, I love that. And I know we are about to wrap up, and everybody tuning in, Incorruptible, the book, will be available in a few weeks from now, by the way, for purchase. So we're going to make sure to send the link to everybody to get it when it's ready. Eric, one last question to then let you go. And this is like a one-liner kind of thing. If HR or as a corporate purpose function has this responsibility, which is like twofold. One, it is collect the data and share the stories, but also align everybody else in this mission of realigning with the mission. If you can tell HR leaders tuning in right now, one thing that they can do after hanging up from this call, after hanging up from this conversation, one thing they can do, what would that thing be?
Okay, gather your team. Do this tomorrow, okay? Gather your team, and you're gonna just do very simple. Ask yourself and ask your team, who would we rather die than betray? Anybody? Is there anyone we would rather die than betray? Hopefully your team will say our employees rather die than betray. Okay, who else? Our customers? Who else? Just lay them out. Now, if your team already says, well, just shareholders, I can't help you. Okay, you're on a direct path to being a sociopathic company in the end. But I don't think that's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear,
No.
okay, these are the people. So, okay, great. I want us to all act like we have a fiduciary commitment to those people. We're going to put their interests before ours from now on. Think like Saul Price did. And then you can follow what I call the Todd Park rule after a really awesome entrepreneur who I profile in the book. Just tell your team, explain the concept of the culture bank, explain the fiduciary commitment concept, and then say, okay, every time we embody this fiduciary commitment, we're making a deposit. When we betray it, we're making a withdrawal. From now on, at least in my department, okay, whoever works for you, that's your domain. I'm not telling you have to go tell the CEO, but in your span of control, we only make deposits. We never make withdrawals. As the late, great Clay Christensen once said, it is easier to do the right thing 100% of the time than 98% of the time. So have a crisp, clear rule. Starting Monday, this is how it's going to be. You'll be astonished at the results you get.
Phenomenal. Eric, thank you so much. I know you got to run in 2 minutes to your next interview. This was a phenomenal conversation. I appreciate you
so
spending
much.
time with us and with our community. Good luck with the book. Hopefully we have you again when the book is published in a few months to see the impact that it will be having at that moment. So
Thank
Eric,
you so much. Such a pleasure. The book comes out May 26th. You can learn more
yes.
at incorruptible.co. And yeah, appreciate everybody's help spreading the word. It's really, and thank you for a great interview.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. We will see you all soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Eric. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.